Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Today's video I think is kind of a special one in the sense that this is some information that maybe a lot of us aren't quite aware of because there's just so much going on. And we talk about how a lot of this is just simply distractions, but there are things happening right now here in the United States that could very directly and in a fairly short amount of time lead to our complete demise and collapse. And I say that because we've seen it happen around the world already in recent times. Just in the last few weeks, I've been saying, hey, keep an eye on Sri Lanka because we're probably not too far behind them. Hey, the Netherlands, they're rioting and all messed up. Hey, South Africa, Panama. Well, there's some information that is basically saying that that's where we're headed. I mean, you know, you have to read between the lines, but I'm going to show you some stuff here in a minute that should wake you up. Wake you up to realize that all of this Great Reset Agenda 2030 is absolutely real. Their agenda to completely collapse us is absolutely real because they want to bring us down to nothing. They have to bring us down to that reset level so that they can restart it in their way with their types of laws and all that kind of stuff. So stick with me because this is a pretty important video. Before I get that going, I just wanted to give some updates on Taiwan and China because that stuff's still going on. I know a lot of you are saying, well, I guess the Chinese aren't doing anything. The Chinese are doing things, and they will most likely continue to do things. They have continued their aggression towards Taiwan by a show of force, I guess you could say. They have been flying sorties all over Taiwan, shooting missiles over Taiwan. They have just about completely surrounded the island in a blockade, and they've announced that they are activating their second carrier group fleet because they are getting ready for war. There is tons of information out there, very official information from the Chinese government that they are in fact prepping for an invasion of Taiwan. They have announced that they are cutting off certain ties or at least suspending dialogue with the United States in military matters and climate change matters. So they're following a pattern that most nations do when they're preparing to go to war with another nation. We saw this happen just a few months ago with Russia and Ukraine and Russia and the United Nations of how there was dialogue, and then finally Russia just said, and they cut the dialogue off. And they started to show force, and they started to do all this training and maneuvers, and everyone's like, oh, it means nothing, it's just the saber rattling. And then the next thing we knew, they were invading Ukraine. And so it's very likely now that this is the path that China has taken. And we've known about this for months now, that China is very interested in invading Taiwan and retaking that island. And I have a feeling that we're going to get involved in that one. And our own government, the Senate, is about ready to pass a bill that would redefine the 1979 Taiwan Agreement by basically saying that Taiwan is a NATO-like nation to us, that it is like NATO without being NATO, and that is our ally, and that we will we will no longer just sell them defensive weapons, but we will sell them offensive weapons. And it will open the doors for more companies in the military-industrial complex to do business in Taiwan. So that is something that is on the verge of also getting passed. Bottom line is it doesn't look good in that area. It does not look good in regards to a war starting up in that area. And I want to point out to you, and I've shared this over on tphnetwork.com, that it was just about a month ago that the Chief General of the British Army was speaking over in Europe, speaking to a bunch of NATO commanders, and he flat out said that the plan is to kind of follow the same plan as World War II, where the European countries take the lead against Russia or against the Europe theater, which actually didn't happen. America took the lead on that one too. And then that would allow America's resources to be able to focus on China. And that's talking about now. So this plan has been in place for quite a while, and it's going to continue to happen, and we need to continue to prepare because the repercussions of China and Taiwan being in a war and us getting dragged into it are, I believe, far, far greater than Russia and Ukraine. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. How do you guys like my green screen today? Yeah, this is I work really hard on producing the green screens for these videos. Anyways, everyone always has to comment on my green screens. The big news is, though, is that no one's talking about this. The big news is that the Democrats claim that they have now, and this was as of just a couple of hours ago of making this video, that they now have enough votes to get the Inflation Reduction Act passed. You're probably aware of this, at least in somewhat. It's a big, $500 billion basically spending plan that they are calling it the inflation reduction, but in a very Orwellian style. It has nothing to do with reducing inflation. In fact, it will most likely drastically increase inflation. Even experts agree on that because they're just spending more money. But there's some things in it that I want to point out because it's all pretty much bad news. I mean, there's just a bunch of stuff in it that's bad, but I want to focus on a few things because while all of it's going to do some bad things for us, these few things could be that final straw on the camel's back. Going back to Sri Lanka, and you're all familiar, I'm sure, with their collapse, what really happened there is that Sri Lanka was one of the countries, and going back to 2017, 2018, there's plenty of news articles about it, and I've shown them here before, that Sri Lanka was kind of the darling child of the Agenda 2030 World Economic Plan. There was all kinds of articles of how they were taking the lead on reduction of carbon emissions, and that they were taking the lead on reducing fertilizers, and that they were going to go all green. And you can find all kinds of stuff about that. In fact, so much so that the World Economic Forum has removed some of the articles that were posted back then about how this is going to do such a great thing. And we've also discussed that on this channel. And you know all that. Well, all these other countries that are going into, massive riots and massive economic problems, it's all pretty much for the same reason. The Netherlands, they're proposing all kinds of restrictions on farming, restrictions on the amount of cows that they're wanting to reduce the herd, spend billions of dollars in reducing the cattle herds, reduce the amount of fertilizer that's used, reduce overall carbon emissions, reduce the amount of energy used. And that's what's going on in Netherlands. Same thing with Italy. Italy's doing the same thing, and we can see the problems from that. And other countries have done it, and we're seeing the problems. Panama's one of them. And then there's other countries that have just recently signed on to this. Canada, they have announced that they're going to reduce the fertilizer usage by 30%. Reduce it, so that's less food produced. Australia's announced that they're planning on reducing their overall emissions by 43% by the year 2030. And I know 2030 sounds like so far away, just like the year 2000 for many of us sounds like just a couple of years ago. But the year 2030 is not that far away, folks. I mean, we're halfway through 2022. So before you know it, it's going to be 2023, and that means 7 years. It's going to be 2030. So not very long, and so all these plans have to take place between now and that 7-year mark. So that's a lot of change going on. Well, this Inflation Reduction Act is that too. It's not called that, and they're not really talking about it at all. You have to really dig in and start reading about it to find it, but it's most certainly there. This article here talks about how this Inflation Reduction Act has provisions in it to reduce our overall emissions as a nation by 40%. 40%. This is a law that's going to get passed, most likely here soon, because they claim they have all the votes that they need to get it passed. It's going to follow the exact same path as Sri Lanka, the Netherlands, Italy, Panama, South Africa, Canada, Australia, where we're going to forcefully reduce the emissions that this nation produces by 40%, okay? That's significant. That's a significant amount. How are they going to do that? Well, they're going to continue to raise prices. They're going to make things unavailable. They're going to keep inflation high, because if inflation is high, people start driving less and they start using less stuff. And so they're going to make it difficult on people, because when we're not as prosperous as before, we spend less and we do less. So this 40% reduction is going to hurt you and I. Oh, it's going to look good on paper. It's a great selling point. wrapped up in a nice pretty bow that we've reduced our emissions by 40%. I mean, we've put everyone in poverty, and half the people now can't even own cars, and the ones that do have them can't afford to drive them anymore. I mean, we've cut back on our emissions in farming because no one's eating, everyone's starving to death. We've reduced the population down by several millions because of different things that we're handing out for ridiculous national emergencies. And hey, it's wonderful, we've reduced our overall emissions by 40%. I know that this sounds a little silly, and I sound quite sarcastic, but I'm telling you, this is true. Another part in the plan is that they're going to give, they've set aside in this bill, over $20 billion, over $20 billion to give to farmers to not plant food. Now, we already do this, and we've been doing this for a long time. I hear people all the time, oh, we've been doing this since the 70s. Of paying farmers not to plant. That's true, but it's growing dramatically all the time. In fact, last year, Biden designated over 3 million additional farmland acreage to this Conservation Protection Act. So an additional 3 million acres of farmland was taken off out of use of farmland because it's protected now, conservation. This here is an additional $20 billion to pay to farmers on top of what we're already doing to not produce food. So that's $20 billion potential. Let's just make this easy. Let's just say $20 billion in vegetables, $20 billion in harvest that would be produced here in the United States is taken off the table. That's a significant amount. Now, of course, that's not all. We produce a lot more than that. But $20 billion, that's significant, and we're talking some real food shortages. Now, I don't know if any of these people went through like 6th grade economics or whatever math, but when I was a kid in school, we learned about the laws of supply and demand. And when the supply goes down and the demand is still high, that increases the prices of things. That inflates the price. And if this is called the Inflation Reduction Act, that's certainly not a way to do it, but what if they reduce the demand also? So if they reduce the supply and they reduce the demand, well, then that could take care of the problem. Well, how do we reduce the demand? The only real way to reduce the demand for food in America is reduce the amount of people in America eating. And I'm not saying that is exactly their plan, although many of these elites have been very blatant about saying that they want to reduce the size of the population. Folks, all kidding aside, this is serious. The things that we've been seeing happen, and you and I have talked about them. You've watched other videos. You've been thinking about, when is the day that we're going to hit Sri Lanka level collapse, or the Netherlands and Italy level chaos and rioting and stuff? When is that going to happen? It may be happening sooner than you think, because it looks like that this bill is pretty much a shoo-in. And if that happens over the next 2 years, 4 years, we could see a 40% reduction of emissions, overall emissions. That's a massive reduction. And paying an additional $20 billion on top of all the other stuff that the bill has in it to farmers to not produce food. Folks, we are watching us go down the exact same path as Sri Lanka, the exact same path of these other nations that bought into this Agenda 2030 Great Reset plan, and they're collapsing. It's all controlled, it's all purposeful, because that's what a reset is. But it's happening, and people need to wake up. You folks need to get ready. You need to be stocking up food-wise, stocking up seeds, getting ready to grow more. I mean, this growing season's kind of over for most people, but there's fall gardening. We're going to start on our fall garden here soon. Take this serious, folks. This isn't something to just roll your eyes at. Just because we're the United States doesn't mean we won't go down the exact same path of these other nations. It's all planned, it's what they want, and it's going to happen, especially if this bill, and I'm sure many others in the future, will be passed to just push us over the edge, because that's what they want. Folks, you have to get your houses in order if you want to survive this. Prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.